Let's kick off this explainer with one of the most unbelievable stories in global history. We're going to dive into how a single private trading company managed to literally checkmate an entire subcontinent. It's a massive, complex story, but treating India like a giant geopolitical chessboard is absolutely the best way to understand exactly how this happened.
It really is a mystery that reshaped the modern world, isn't it? How did a simple merchant's quest for spices turn into 2 centuries of imperial rule over India? Because remember, we aren't talking about a massive, state-sponsored national army invading here. We are talking about a joint stock company, essentially a corporation that just started with some merchants looking to make a healthy profit.
To figure this out, we are going to look at the board and move step by step through 5 key phases. First, motives, spices and textiles. Second, clearing European rivals. Third, the Mughal power vacuum. Fourth, the rise and fall of Bengal. And finally, Awadh and the Karnataka. Section 1. Motives, spices, and textiles, the initial setup.
So why did Europeans show up in the first place? Well, it was purely for trade. Specifically, they were desperate for spices to preserve meat back in a prospering Europe. And there's a really fascinating historical misconception here. People constantly argue about who came first, the Dutch or the British. The truth is, while the Dutch physically arrived first in 1596, the British actually established their trading corporation earlier. The British John Company was formed in 1599 and got its royal charter in 1600, whereas the formal Dutch East India Company wasn't officially formed until 1602.
As they started setting up shop, the British quickly realized they desperately needed a major transit point. And for their strategy, they zeroed in on Surat. You can think of Surat as acting exactly like a massive modern metro transfer station, kind of like Rajiv Chowk in Delhi. It was perfectly positioned on the western coast. They could funnel textiles from all over India right into the city, load them straight onto ships, and then funnel foreign goods out. It was just the ultimate logistical hub. But as you might guess, getting permission to trade in Surat wasn't a walk in the park. To secure those rights, Captain William Hawkins sailed in on the ship Hector in 1608. The Mughal emperor at the time, Jahangir, was extremely skeptical of Europeans, mainly because the Portuguese had already been causing a ton of trouble. But Hawkins pulled a brilliant move. He completely charmed the emperor by speaking to him in fluent Turkish. It was a genius way to bypass religious tensions and build a genuine personal connection.
You'd think that charm offensive would work immediately, right? Actually, no. Despite Hawkins aiming specifically for Surat, the British were initially denied. They were essentially forced to build their very first factory way over in Masalipatnam on the eastern coast in 1611. It wasn't until a couple of years later, after they finally proved their naval strength by fighting off the Portuguese, that the emperor granted them Surat in 1613.
Section 2. Clearing European rivals. The first eliminations.
Now the British obviously weren't the only ones who wanted a piece of the pie. Both the British and the Dutch initially just wanted Indonesian spices, but they hit a massive snag. The locals in Indonesia didn't care at all about European currency. What they wanted was Indian textiles. This meant both European powers suddenly had to secure Indian cotton just to barter for Indonesian spices, and that created a huge clash of commercial interests.
And this brings us to a major turning point, and it's a brutal one. The horrific Amboina Massacre in 1623. Over in the Indonesian Spice Islands, the Dutch falsely accused, tortured, and executed 10 Englishmen and some Japanese mercenaries. It was a horrific incident, but it forced a massive geographical truce. The Dutch essentially took Indonesia and its spices, which left the massive, wealthy territory of India wide open for the British to dominate the textile trade.
That being said, the Dutch did still have a lingering presence in India for a while. But decades later, the British delivered the absolute final blow. At the Battle of Badara in Bengal in 1759, the British decisively crushed the remaining Dutch forces. That permanently removed the Dutch from the Indian chessboard. The European field was finally clearing out.
Section 3. The Mughal power vacuum. The crumbling center.
With their European rivals out of the picture, the British started looking inwards, and they noticed something huge. The central authority of the mighty Mughal Empire was crumbling. Nothing exposed this fatal weakness more than Nader Shah's devastating invasion from the northwest. In 1739, at the Battle of Karnal, the Mughal emperor himself, Muhammad Shah, was actually captured in battle. Nader Shah inflicted massive plunder, literally draining the empire's wealth. He even took the famous peacock throne. The Mughal center was left utterly paralyzed.
Section 4. Rise and Fall of Bengal. The first regional checkmate.
So, seeing this central power collapse, regional leaders immediately tried to assert their own independence. Over in Bengal, leaders like Murshid Quli Khan tried to lock down power through some pretty ruthless economic engines. He instituted the Mal Zamin system. This is basically a super strict contract farming system where agents had to guarantee a massive, fixed revenue to the state. If they failed to pay up, their personal wealth was entirely confiscated. It was highly effective for sure, but deeply ruthless.
Despite all that wealth, Bengal was completely plagued by internal turmoil and rapid successions. This volatility is perfectly highlighted by a guy named Ali Vardi Khan. Get this, the man literally started his career managing the royal elephant stables. Yet through sheer ambition and military force, he violently seized the throne himself after winning the Battle of Garia. So, Bengal was incredibly wealthy, but politically it was a powder keg, which made it a prime target for the British. Section 5. Awadh and the Carnatic. The final pieces fall.
Once Bengal started falling under their influence, the British looked to the remaining regional heavyweights. Awadh was an absolute strategic goldmine. It was perfectly positioned right next to Delhi and packed with rich agricultural lands. Its leader, Saadat Ali Khan, was highly capable. But tragically, when he tried to save the Mughal emperor from Nader Shah's invasion, it backfired. Saadat Ali Khan was captured during the Battle of Karnal. That completely shattered Awadh's stability, and what was once a strong buffer state just became another vulnerable pawn.
And down south, it was the exact same story of internal chaos. Clever British commanders, especially Robert Clive, saw a huge opportunity during the Carnatic Wars. Whenever an Indian ruler died, a succession dispute immediately followed. Clive and the British essentially weaponized these disputes. They used local Indian armies as proxies to fight their last remaining European rival, the French, and steadily took over the administration and revenues of the entire southern region.
Which brings us to a really fascinating question to wrap up this explainer. Was it really British brilliance and military might that conquered the subcontinent, or was it simply the tragic disunity, the constant backstabbing, and the internal proxy wars of the Indian kings that effectively handed the chessboard over to a private trading company? It's an incredible historical lesson and a stark reminder of the ultimate dangers of a divided house.